Right now. All right. So today's our first guest lecture series. We have Chris Castro from the city of Orlando. Chris is currently the Director of Sustainability and Resilience in the city of Orlando. He serves as the Senior Advisor to Orlando Mayor and again, the Director of Sustainability and Resilience and Future Ready Steering Committee member at the City of Orlando. He develops a comprehensive set of policies, programs, and partnerships that has turned Orlando into one of the leading cities in the US, accelerating sustainability, resilience, and climate action. Prior to coming to the City of Orlando, Chris was the co-founder and president of the global sustainability nonprofit Ideas for Us and the Citizen Energy, it's a clean energy consulting firm, and renowned urban farming social enterprise, the Fleet Farming. In 2020, last year, Chris has joined partners to launch the Climate First Bank. It's the first B Corp community bank in Florida working to advance the ESG, environmental, social, and corporate governance, and local sustainable investing. Outside of work, Chris serves on many nonprofit and academic boards, including the UCF Energy Research Center, the U.S. Green Building Council of Florida, Project Green Schools, and Goodwill Industries of Central Florida. In December 2018, Chris starred in the National Geographic documentary on climate change called The Paris to Petersburg to share the Orlando journey on climate action to millions of people around the globe. Chris received his bachelor's in 2010 from UCF in environmental science policy and policy minor in energy and sustainability, and he has a certificate in service learning. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining us today. And please join me in welcoming Chris Castro from City of Orlando. And without further ado, the virtual floor is all yours.
Thank you, Professor El-Sayed. I really appreciate it. And to all you students out there, thank you for joining us today to learn a little bit more about how cities are trying to move in a healthier and more sustainable direction. And hopefully my presentation will kind of give you some examples of the different types of policies and programs and partnerships that we're developing to really make Orlando a city of the future at the forefront of innovation and sustainability. So just quickly starting out this, just so we're all on the same page, a lot of people have heard of this concept of sustainable cities or eco-cities, and truly these are cities that are designed with the consideration of the triple bottom line: social, economic, and environmental impacts, and ways in which we can identify resilient habitat for existing populations without compromising the ability of future generations to experience the same. And it goes back to that, core definition of sustainable development. And I often point people to this concept of Earth Overshoot Day. If you're not familiar with Earth Overshoot Day, this really opened my eyes when I learned about it as to what sustainability is about. And ultimately, it's about finding balance with the natural resources that our Earth naturally replenishes every day or every year, and finding a way for us to actually find balance with the resources that we consume. And this graphic shows you that starting back in 1970, we began to witness what's called Earth Overshoot Day, where there's a specific date throughout the year where humanity has consumed more resources than the Earth can naturally replenish. And year over year, we've seen that number tick up in the wrong direction. Even during COVID-19 and the global pandemic, last year, Earth Overshoot Day was around August 22nd. And every day after, from August 23rd to December 31st, we were literally taking resources from the next generation to meet our present needs. And so when we talk about sustainability, it's about finding balance and going back to a future as we continue to grow, going back to a future where we utilize the resources that the Earth can naturally replenish, and in fact, move not just to sustainability, which is where that balance is, but how do we continue to move in that spectrum towards regeneration, restorative, and towards regeneration, moving to a future where we actually contribute in a more positive way to these natural resources and natural systems than we consume every single year. And this is the spectrum that we're in, right? We've been in conventional degradation form of an economy We've moved towards green the last, 10, 15 years. We're moving towards sustainable and beyond. And so, as practitioners, we are taught to really look at, in order to realize that future, we're taught to look at things in this triple bottom line lens: people, planet, and prosperity, or social, environmental, and economic reasons. And of course, true sustainability is finding that nexus between all three of those important factors. And that's really what we're about. Now, it's also critical for you all to realize that there is this global standard for sustainable development that was developed over the course of the last decade, but really launched in 2015 by the United Nations and over 196 countries. And essentially, they said, let's come together and identify the goals that all of our nations can work towards in order to end poverty, eliminate inequalities, and protect ourselves from the threats of the climate crisis and the environmental crisis that we're facing today. And as you can see, these 17 global goals, also known as the SDGs, really touch on almost every facet of society, everything from poverty and hunger to the economy and manufacturing, to our energy systems, addressing climate, all the way to peace, justice, and strong institutions, in ways that we need to partner together to achieve these goals. And so it's important that you see the boxes outlining certain goals. Well, Orlando is in the process of publishing our first voluntary local review, what they call a VLR. This is a formal report to the United Nations on how our city is helping to advance those SDGs and make our city a showcase for the future. And so the boxes that are highlighted are all of the goals that we have been actively working towards just in my Office of Sustainability and Resilience. Now, that actually brings us to the office. You might have heard about what's called Greenworks Orlando, and this is the brand that we've been using since 2007, when our mayor, Buddy Dyer, launched Greenworks. And over the last 7 years that I've been here at the city, what we've been able to do is remarkable. We took Greenworks from just an initiative in the mayor's office, and we've actually institutionalized sustainability as part of the core function of how Orlando operates. We now have a formal Office of Sustainability and Resilience, and really the way I describe us is we're an in-house consulting firm that really helps our various departments and divisions across the city: police and fire, planning and permitting, streets, stormwater, everywhere in between. And we help those departments to incorporate operational improvements, to incorporate internal policies that will make our city more sustainable. And simultaneously, we look externally and partner with our utility, transit authority, the business chambers, the academic institutions, our residents and beyond, to really build out and infuse a culture of sustainability throughout the city. Now, as we've pulled together and co-created this strategy of Greenworks Orlando with our residents and our partners, we've identified 7 key areas of sustainability that we've realized is cornerstone to moving a community, small, medium, or large size community, in the direction of a sustainable future. And those include, as you can see there, clean energy, green buildings, local food systems, zero waste and circular economy, livability in our natural systems and ecology, clean water, and lastly, electric and alternative transportation. And today I'm going to try to cover 3 of those 7 topics and demystify kind of what we're doing. Before I do that, I do want to let you all know that, as cities, we really look long-term in developing strategies and plans. And, we have a really robust set of these plans that can be found on our website. But everything from the top left of our municipal operations sustainability plan, this is looking internally under the hood of the car, so to speak, to look at how can we as a city move in that direction. At the top right, we have a whole community action plan that was really goals and targets out to 2040 and 2050. And those strategies were co-created with our residents, helping us to prioritize what we should be doing. And the last one I wanted to point to at the very bottom is the Future Ready Master Plan. And that plan was just published in December. And it really does an interesting idea. You've probably heard of smart cities before. Well, we decided to coin this program Future Ready because ultimately what we're trying to do is make sure that Orlando is ready for any future advancement in technology, any shock or stressor that hits our city, and making sure that we're more resilient as we move forward. And so the Future Ready Master Plan really did a great job at outlining, how to use technology, data analytics, and to advance these goals. Everything that we do in the city is focused on using data to drive policy and decision making. And one of the important data points that cities are beginning to look at is their greenhouse gas emissions footprint, essentially their carbon footprint as an entire city. And most people don't realize, but 70% of global carbon emissions are associated with cities and urban settlements. They're actually coming from cities like Orlando all around the world. And if we're going to solve this problem, cities need to really step up their ambition and their efforts to begin mitigating carbon emissions, reducing and eliminating carbon emissions, and eventually moving forward with drawdown and actually helping to sequester excess carbon in the atmosphere as well. So these graphics here are the carbon footprint of Orlando dating back all the way to 2007 when we launched Greenworks. And what's interesting on the right-hand side in the pie chart is this breaks up the various factors of the community in terms of their emissions profile. And another thing that most people don't realize is that the biggest contributor of carbon emissions and greenhouse gases in Orlando actually is our buildings that use dirty energy, both on-site and the electricity that's generated that they consume. And so when you look at the green pie chart and the blue wedge there, the green and blue wedge, that's residential and commercial and industrial buildings using this dirty energy. And that dirty energy contributing to air pollution and carbon emissions as a result, right? The yellow wedge there is our on-road transportation vehicles, buses, freight, cars, etc. And the rest are smaller wedges around solid waste. Of course, landfills emit methane, and that has a carbon dioxide equivalent, CO2e. And so, landfills are wastewater treatment plants, etc. So this gives you a snapshot that buildings and transportation are the vast majority of an emissions profile of Orlando and many cities around the country, looking very similar to what we're seeing here. I also wanted to quickly share from a US perspective, this graphic by Lawrence Livermore National Lab is super eye-opening. It is the estimated US energy consumption in 2019. And the fascinating thing is it points out on the far left all of the primary energy sources that are inputs into our system, our society, our economy. So you can see things like nuclear and solar and wind and geothermal, also natural gas, coal, petroleum, primarily obviously going to transportation sector fuels. Then it points out the 4 sectors of the economy that demand that energy every single day: residential buildings, commercial buildings, industrial buildings, and transportation. When you actually look at the energy consumed, it falls in those 4 buckets. And what I find fascinating is that 2/3 of the primary energy that we're consuming to do work actually goes to waste, primarily wasted to loss heat, which we don't do a very good job at recovering and reusing. And so 2/3 of the energy that we're consuming to heat and cool our homes, to power industry and manufacturing, to move people and goods in our cars is lost. And so we have a super anemic system. We're very inefficient. And one of the big global trends that we're seeing is electrification. We're beginning to move towards electric vehicles, electric HVAC systems, electric hot water heaters, right? And we're moving away from, on-site gas systems. And as you begin to electrify, you begin to realize that there's a lot of waste in the electric generation as well. Look at that yellow or that orange wedge at the top there, really showing 2/3 as well, even over that, are lost in that system. And how does that relate to carbon emissions? Well, as you can see, the renewable energy systems have little to no carbon output. Of course, that's the benefit of renewables. And then you can see that the majority of the carbon is coming from natural gas, coal, and petroleum. And what's fascinating is, similarly, it helps us identify what sectors of the economy are contributing more to carbon. As you can see there, transportation actually breached electricity generation in 2018. Just 3 years ago, transportation went over in terms of the amount of carbon it contributes because electricity has been decarbonizing from coal to natural gas just because of market forces, right? We have hydraulic fracturing come in the early 2000s, and all of a sudden natural gas prices drop, supply increases, and you start to see a natural transition away from coal in this country and even other parts of the world. So, and then, of course, there's the actual externality of the carbon emissions associated with the United States and running our economy. We, by the way, contribute about 17% of global climate change emissions globally. Now, of course, the United States and our growth of industrial revolution over the last 150, 200 years has contributed more than any other nation still to date. And a per capita standpoint, we're still pretty high up there. And so we need to, rapidly begin to decarbonize. So our strategy, in a nutshell, falls in these 4 buckets. And this is our carbon mitigation strategy to really reduce and eliminate emissions. And those fall in those 4 buckets. The first is reducing building energy use and accelerating more energy efficiency on the demand side. Secondly, we need to decarbonize the electric grid, and we need to increase renewable energy adoption. Third, we have to still encourage people to use alternative forms of transportation because it's not enough for every vehicle on the road to be electric. And we need to figure out ways to get people to use micromobility and public transit and others to minimize the vehicle miles traveled in our cities. And lastly, we need to electrify transportation. It's that simple, moving away from dirty, polluting sources of energy. So what I wanted to do is dive in very quickly to each one of these strategies and open it up at the end for some Q&A as well. So the first one is around green buildings. And it's important to realize that, cities are in control often of certainly their own municipal building code. And for us in Orlando, we've set a stretch code beyond the Florida Building Code that requires LEED Silver certification for all new city buildings that we build. Everything from the Amway Center to the new soccer stadium to the fire stations, they're all built to LEED Silver or above. Most of them are actually LEED Gold. And so we do this because it's the most fiscally prudent and responsible thing to do as government. In the grand scheme of things, only 25% of a building's cost is spent to build the actual facility. And 75% is to operate and maintain these systems over the lifetime of those facilities. So it makes no sense for us to build to what I call the worst building to build by law, which is the Florida Building Code. You cannot get worse than the Florida Building Code. So instead of building to the building code, we're going above and beyond to ensure higher performance of our buildings, which saves taxpayer dollars because they're more efficient, they use less utilities, and therefore less cost to operate them over the useful life. In addition, they also have great environmental benefits, productivity, and indoor air quality and environment. And of course, today in a pandemic world, the green buildings are critical. Now, it's not enough to just build new buildings to be high performance. We also have 7.2 million square feet under management that has already been built. And most of them haven't been built to the LEED standard or above. So we have started to retrofit our existing buildings, going back and changing lighting to LED, adding building automation and control systems, BAS, throughout all of our buildings. And then also, retrofitting HVAC and service hot water, which has led to significant reductions in energy use and in cost. We did a $17.5 million green bond in 2017. And since 2017 to now, we're saving $2.2 million per year compared to the baseline in 2016. And we're using those savings to pay the debt and the interest on the green bond, plus the excess savings of about $250,000 to $300,000 per year is being recirculated in a revolving energy fund. So we're basically doing an in-house energy saving performance contract, ESPC, which is a popular strategy for buildings to go through retrofits. But instead of hiring a private company, we self-performed that effort and have shown significant savings as a result. The other question from a policy standpoint is how can cities really help move the real estate market to be more efficient? And one of the ways to do that is by requiring energy benchmarking, which is measuring how their buildings use energy and water and other utilities versus their peers, right? And so there's a tool called Energy Star Portfolio Manager. It's a free tool. I actually teach high school kids how to use this tool and benchmark their buildings. It's a lot of fun. And that tool gives you a 1 to 100 score, almost like the energy gauge label you see in that downtown skyline shot of Orlando. Imagine having an energy gauge, not just for your hot water heater or your laptop, which now is readily available, but imagine having that for your whole building so that you know the next time you want to rent an apartment that you're not just thinking about the cost of rent, but also the cost of utilities and the total cost of living. We often forget that. So since 2017, Orlando has had this policy. About 1,000 buildings per year are required to benchmark and report, and we take that data and actually make it publicly transparent. And we're beginning to see some very interesting analytics coming from the data in terms of which building space types have the greatest carbon footprint, which building space types have the greatest energy use intensity, EUI, and how do we start to target programs to those, consumers, to those energy hogs and large energy users, so that they can actually minimize their consumption, lower pollution, and save themselves money. Lastly, on buildings is we're very focused on equity. And my office has started to do equity maps of Orlando in identifying how certain demographics, certain Black, Hispanic, Latinx, and people of color, and how their communities are disproportionately impacted by certain things like transportation burden, food insecurity, and certainly energy burdens. So this is a map showing you in the hot spots, right? The dark red there on the left shows you areas within our community that have energy burdens as high as 15 and 20%, meaning 15 to 20% of their monthly income is actually going towards paying utilities because they're in renter properties that are dilapidated, substandard housing, and the landlord, the owner of the property, is reluctant to make improvements to save energy because the landlord owner doesn't pay the utility bills. So we have this landlord-tenant complex, and it's not just Orlando, it's almost every city in the country, and we're trying to figure out how do we begin addressing that. So the next slide is a short video clip that shows you an example of an affordable housing project where we were able to make great improvements. And actually, I'm gonna quickly unshare and reshare and make sure I add the audio. So hold on 1 second. Unshare, share sound. Okay, so here we go.
New Horizons is not only a home for residents who reside here or soon will reside here, but this is a place where they'll have graduations and holidays, and they will celebrate life in a safe way. So we've got a rooftop solar array, we've got a community garden, we've got native Florida landscaping, and there's a lot of sustainability pieces that are inside the units. And I actually believe we can claim the title of the most sustainable city in the Southeast United States.
So that's a good example because tenants who live in this apartment complex after these retrofits are saving between $400 and $600 annually on their utility bills. That's a lot. That's between $40 and $60 or so per month that people are no longer having to spend on utilities that they can put as meals to feed their family, that they can put towards medical expenditures and other quality of life improvements. So it's really about driving efficiency on the demand side. So clean energy is going to be the next move. I often say we have to reduce, then produce, right? The most cost-effective way to transition to clean energy is accelerate energy efficiency, lower your demand as much as possible, and then begin to switch over to renewable energy. And so now we're making the switch from demand to supply. Orlando has our own hometown utility, Orlando Utilities Commission, OUC. This is a municipal utility owned by the city, and it's unique because it actually is vertically integrated. It owns a very diverse set of electricity generation facilities, like you can see here. It owns the transmission and distribution corridors. It owns the meters. I mean, we're vertically integrated. And so, one of the things that we're focused on, though, is how to make the switch away from the energy that built our world, fossil fuels, to the energy that's going to shape our future, zero emission sources of electricity. And so in 2017, Orlando set policy that commits us to moving our city operations to 100% renewables by 2030 and the entire city, citywide, by 2050. Every hotel, every theme park, every resident, moving forward towards being powered by renewables. Now, the question is always, well, that's great for a city to make that commitment, but what does your utility think about that? There's a lot of cities that are subject to investor-owned utilities like FPL and Duke Energy that actually don't have to, they don't have to report directly to their residents as shareholders. Their shareholders are investors. And so they have a different perspective. And there's a lot of cities that are in Florida that have committed to 100% renewables, but they're subject to FPL and Duke and TECO and other IOUs in making that decision. Luckily, Orlando does have a little bit more control. And in December, our utility came out with a very bold plan, what they call an Energy Integrated Resource Plan, EIRP. The IRPs are scenario forecasting exercises that looks at what the future of fuel supply is going to be for the electric grid. And what OUC came out with after robust community engagement is that we're going to commit to net zero carbon without carbon offsets by 2050. We're going to set intermediate CO2 reduction targets of 50% in 2030 and 75% in 2040. And we're going to end coal-fired generation in Orlando no later than 2027, with significant reductions in 2025. I can't tell you how big of an announcement that is, because ultimately these are some of the newest coal plants in the country. The first one built in 1989, the second one was started and built in 1996. Both of these units, coal plants are 60-year assets normally. Both of these units could run another 20 to 30 years. But because of our commitment to climate, because of our commitment towards cleaner air and water and reduction of public health impacts, we are making a concerted effort to close and retire those plants early. And we're going to replace those plants with a cleaner bridge of natural gas in the short term for a 15-year period by 2040, retiring that bridge gas and being nothing but renewable energy from 2030 and on. So we are in alignment between the city and the utility, and that's amazing. Now, in order to get there, we have to start to map out our community's potential generation. And so we've worked with Google, Project Sunroof, and a group called GreenLink Analytics to map out every rooftop in Orlando and figure out what rooftops are not just theoretically possible, but which ones are economically feasible, and also what's the adoption probability of that economic feasibility. And what we saw was 92% of rooftops in Orlando get enough sun throughout the day to make the economics work for solar. And that's about 2 gigawatts of capacity, 1.9 thousand megawatts, 2 gigawatts of capacity, which basically is about double of what Orlando needs to meet our energy mix today. We use about 1.2 gigawatts of electricity generation capacity today to meet our needs. And it's saying that rooftop solar, just rooftop, not carports, not ground mounted, not floating, just rooftop, is about 2 gigawatts of potential. So those were some of the most recent rooftop solar arrays. And as you can see, they were all on fire stations. We're beginning to target critical facilities from a resilience standpoint to make sure that even during grid outage, these fire stations will be able to sustain critical function and power. And we're starting to get the Emergency Operations Center, our neighborhood centers that provide refuge during and after storms. We want to make sure that these critical facilities we're preparing for so that they can be resilient in those times. We're also building out, our first net zero complex. This is 420 kilowatts on top of our fleet maintenance complex. And as you can see on the right, we're building in the process, RFP is hitting the street in the next couple weeks. We are going to be building a solar carport that will shade the vehicles that are there on the ground floor and actually provide conduit for electric vehicle charging stations. That will be an entire EV lot. There's so many EVs now in our fleet that we are needing an entire lot just for electric vehicles. This is another building actually showing that we hit net zero for the first time this past year, meaning we produced more electricity on the rooftop than we consumed. And from a city's perspective, we've been also helping our community to adopt rooftop solar through programs like solar cooperatives, or solar co-ops for short. These are group buying programs where residents who are interested in going rooftop solar join a co-op, basically join a group, and that group goes out to the market to request for solar installers. So they go out as a team, as a group of homeowners wanting to go solar. And what that does is it helps achieve better economies of scale. For the contractor that gets selected, they can actually go and bulk purchase panels. Instead of it just being one home, there's 100 homes that want to go solar. And so that actually leads to better price points. And we've seen solar co-ops started in 2016 here in Florida. I sit on the founding board of this organization. It's amazing what we have done across the state. And in Orlando, we have done several megawatts, just the last 2 years, 1.5 megawatts, but we've done, I think, close to 3 megawatts since we started this of rooftop solar capacity. And these are small 10 kilowatt, 8 kilowatt systems on average. So you can imagine hundreds of homes have gone solar just through this co-op program. Now, the challenge is that more and more people are actually moving towards multifamily. We have more than 50% of residents in Orlando living in apartments and condos and townhouses. And as a result, they often don't have the same rooftop to add solar. So the question becomes, how do they go 100% renewables? Well, we've started to now roll out a community solar program where residents can tap in to these larger solar farms that we are now installing and operating, and they can virtually subscribe from their one apartment on the 15th floor of a downtown, apartment complex. They can get their one apartment and offset 100% of their consumption from these solar farms. We now have over 150 megawatts of solar capacity in our portfolio. We have another 150 in development that will be done by the end of next year, end of 2022. And we're beginning to see a pretty drastic amount. And it's funny because people are asking, what's the cost for these types of large solar farms? And the cost happens to be undercutting new natural gas combined cycle generation and definitely new coal, new nuclear. They're basically the cheapest form of new power generation, which is why these utilities are putting them in, because they're going to be printing money. That's really what it comes down to. They're not putting them in because they want to save the planet. I can tell you that. They're putting them in because it's actually better for their pocketbook. And what you just saw there was an example of floating solar. We're beginning to look at a new application for solar in this region. And Orlando is a national test site for NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab. We are working with NREL to research the efficiency improvements, the unintended consequences of floating solar on potentially the water bodies or surrounding aquatic life. We're starting to really look into this as a scalable solution. And at the Orlando International Airport, we now have a floating solar array in the shape of Orlando's logo, and people can see that on that people mover. You can see the people mover there, autonomous tram, so we're really moving in kind of that city of the future vision quite rapidly. And the last thing on energy, just real quick, is hydrogen production. And we're beginning to do a whole research project of a nanogrid using hydrogen, green hydrogen, to deal with the intermittencies of solar and renewables. So essentially we have floating solar that's going to be electrolyzing water, splitting water, storing hydrogen in these 1H2 tanks that you see there. And then those tanks are going to be going into a fuel cell, and that fuel cell is going to be creating electricity and helping to true up the generation curve of solar as cloud cover comes over, or as we have a longer term storm that we may need to weather for over time. I know that I'm running up on time here, so I'm